Hello guys, welcome to Star Wars Timeline. In today's character highlight video, we're talking about Sheev Palpatine. I would like to present you with three distinct versions of the character and talk about him as the Emperor in the original trilogy, discuss him as the Chancellor Palpatine in the prequels, and then take a look at the resurrected Emperor from the sequels. And the argument I'd like to make in this video is that all three are fundamentally different characters, and that all that I'm going to say in this video is not really a statement of fact. It's just my personal, humble opinion, and I really want to engage you and hear your thoughts about this in the comment section below. And just to give you an idea where I'm coming from, I saw prequels as they were coming out in theaters. I was 19 years old when The Phantom Menace came out, and specifically Palpatine that I want to take a look at excludes what we later get in the expanded universe novels, because I was reading the books parallel as they were coming out next to the movie, and all the additional stuff like Darth Plagueis novel and Cloak of Deception, where we discuss Palpatine and his machinations, and Darth Bane's Rule of Two, all of that comes in later. I would like to purely look at the information and stuff we get from the films and discuss Palpatine from that specific perspective. So without further ado, let's jump into the Palpatine and discuss him as the Emperor from the original saga. So who is the Emperor in the original saga as the character, and what is his role there? The way that I saw him back in 1987 was my first introduction to VHS tapes, and really, to me, the trilogy existed as one entity. And when we see the Emperor briefly in the 5th episode, there's not much to deduce about him. And we're like, okay, who is this person? And then, of course, we get to the Return of the Jedi. And this is where the Emperor shines. And I remember when I was a kid, my first reaction to him was, who is this ancient wizard? He's so wrinkled and old. He looks unnaturally older than everybody else in the saga. It almost gives you an impression that he has lived for some reason for hundreds and hundreds of years, prolonging his life unnaturally. And we, of course, understand that he's a very cunning strategist, because the way that he manipulates Vader, the way that he uses Luke and his anger towards his father, and he tries to, have the two fight together to be and choose the winner at his side. So there, when he points to Luke through the window and see, look, my entire fleet is here, and the rebels have no chance. Of course, we see him as this cunning strategist and very manipulative person. And later on, when he wants to punish Luke for not succumbing to the dark side, he uses his magic. He uses the Force lightning ability, and that's how he's able to physically overpower Luke until, of course, the moment that Vader tosses him into the chute and he's done with. So in that regard, we don't see any physicality coming from the Emperor. His power solely stems from his magic, from his Force use. And that's the way I saw him, and there was nothing else to be added to him. And for me, he functioned as this great evil personified in one person. He's a manipulator. He is this darkness that lives in the hearts of all people, and that sometimes it's so easy that we fall into it. We fall into aggression, we resort to violence, or if we're going to talk about Star Wars fandom, sometimes when you engage somebody on Facebook or in other social media, it's very easy to succumb to bickering, and then words start flying and we insult each other. So in that sense, Palpatine, the Emperor, perfectly illustrates that idea, that how easy it is to fall to the dark side. And I feel that both Darth Vader and Palpatine, before they officially start being called Sith Lords in the films and the expanded universe, they benefit greatly from all the story that we don't see, that exists purely outside of the screen. And just to give you one example is, in Episode 4, we see the discussion in the war room where Governor Tarkin walks in, he sits down, and he informs all the Moffs, saying that, look, the Emperor has just disband the Senate. The Senate is no more, and all the regional governors have direct power now, and we will rule through fear. That kind of exposition gives you an idea what kind of person the Emperor is, but nothing beyond. And for me, seeing those movies as a child, it was an interesting way to world building and an open door into imagination. And for me, it was interacting with the movie on my own terms and trying to imagine who this Emperor was before we see him in Episode 6. So that's who he is. Now come the prequels. And I felt that he was quite a different character in those films, and let me explain why. What is his character role? Once again, we see him as a cunning person, correct? That corresponds very well to what I remember seeing him in the original saga. But now we see an added layer to him. Now he is this two-faced politician. He's openly there challenging, talking to the Jedi, talking to the Senate, and he tries to be this good and kind natured person. He's there as an advisor, of course, to Queen Amidala, but we also know his other side. And for those of us original fans who grew up with original films, the moment that we see Ian McDiarmid's face on screen, we automatically know that he is the Emperor. There was no surprise there, and that was one of my first gripes with this character, but we're putting that on the side right now. We're just discussing to what capacity he works in that film. And of course, the biggest role that he has in the prequel trilogy is that he's the seducer of the hero. He's the one who feeds Anakin. He feeds his aggression. He feeds on his fear that Anakin might lose his beloved wife, and he already loses his mother. And that's how he's able to tempt him with the dark side and twist and corrupt him and get him there. So I felt in that respect, he was that, once again, that villainy that is able to destroy even the most promising hero, the chosen one. And I believe that the prequels, Palpatine, first and foremost, greatly benefits from the Legends novels and the comic books. And why? Because I feel that in the film itself, in the entire prequel trilogy, he's not a very well-written character. And I'll explain why. We see him openly parade in front of the entire Jedi Order, and not even the most wise like Yoda or Mace Windu can recognize that. And I'll explain where that comes from and why I disagree. If it was perhaps George Lucas's idea to illustrate that is the last days of the Jedi because they are too much of a politicians, they're too much involved with their status rather than looking and solving the issues, from that regard, it could work. But I felt that that argument and the argument that Palpatine is so well versed in the dark side that he knows how to hide himself from the Force, I felt that unfounded. For me personally, it doesn't work. If it works for you, once again, I would love to hear your comments below and we could conversate about it. That's the whole point of this video. It's not for me to take anything away from you guys who grew up with the prequel trilogy and who enjoyed. It's just my personal outlook on this character. So what happens with the prequels, Palpatine, and how later on his position was explained is that we have the original Timothy Zahn's Throne trilogy. And as we know the history of those books, they were written in correspondence with what George Lucas was looking for. Timothy Zahn has specifically explained in the many interviews that him and George Lucas discussed what's going to happen in those books, how Luke is going to be as a character, what is the Force, and so forth. And there are these lizards in the forests of Myrkr where Thrawn extracts these Yassalamir, and what these creatures are able to do is to hide themselves from the Force. They have this natural instinct where whatever predators are trying to attack them, they hide themselves from the Force, and that's how they are unseen. And it felt to me that future novels that started coming out much later after Episode 1, so after the prequel trilogy has launched, we have novels like the Cloak of Deception, where we see the entire cunning of Chancellor Palpatine. We see, of course, Darth Bane's trilogy, and specifically the book Rule of Two, where he established that idea that there can only be master and apprentice, and they go into hiding, and they don't need an entire Sith order, destroy all those weaklings. That's where Sith are the strongest, when there's only the master and the apprentice. And of course, there's a Darth Plagueis novel where we see young Palpatine come to power through overpowering his master, which is supposed to be. That's the canon. Those are the beliefs that the Sith follow. And from that regard, yes, I would say that Palpatine works quite well, and I enjoyed prequels from perspective of the expanded universe novels. James Luceno's novel Cloak of Deception is one of my all-time favorite Star Wars books. And whoever says that, like politics, they don't belong in Star Wars, they're boring, well, take a look at that novel. I thought it was quite engaging and very, very suspenseful, unlike in prequels, especially episode 1, where there's like this trade federation and they're bickering over, trading laws and stuff like that. That was a snore fest for me. But when you read The Cloak of Deception and you see how Palpatine is playing this long run game, he's playing chess while the Jedi are playing checkers. He's seeing 10 moves ahead of them. And from that point, once again, I want to point out that I am a fan of Palpatine, but that one, not what we saw on screen. And my biggest criticism of him is in Revenge of the Sith, because there's one specific scene that took me completely out of the experience, and that was when some of the most illustrious Jedi go to arrest Palpatine, knowing full well that he is a Sith. And among them, we have Mace Windu, and of course we have Kit Fisto, somebody who is described as to be one of the most efficient duelists in the Star Wars franchise. And when we see Palpatine jump out of his seat, he says, "Oh, well, it's treason then." And he extracts his lightsaber and he jumps around. He does this crazy twist in the air and starts doing all that physical stuff. It was hard for me to accept just on the visual front of it. It's like, come on, he's a 65-year-old dude. I don't care if he's a Sith Lord or not. And once again, we're seeing Revenge of the Sith without the benefit of all those future books that started coming out and kind of, in my opinion, trying to plug the holes in the trilogy and rectify and rationalize some of the decision-making that went behind making those films and portraying Palpatine in those films. So yeah, him jumping around, I thought it was a little bit overdone, because when we see Obi-Wan Kenobi, also arguably one of the strongest Force users in the franchise, and we see him versus Vader in Episode 4, he's an older man. He tries to do some fencing, he wins this fight with his faith in the Force. And that's what I wanted to see from Palpatine. I honestly expected Ian McDiarmid to be completely in the shadow, and we had another political puppet that parades in front of the Jedi Order, and all that he does is fulfill the evil Emperor's will. That he is a puppet on the string, and Palpatine is far away from the Republic Center, from Coruscant, and he kind of like manipulates the way we almost see him in the holograms, and we see a Darth Maul by his side. That's what I wanted to see more of. An intellectual mastermind versus somebody who's like, even in his 65 years of age, that's what he is in Revenge of the Sith, doing all that crazy physical stuff. And then the CGI, of course, showing Ian McDiarmid's CGI face pasted on top of obviously younger actor. So that didn't work for me. Now let's get to the sequels Palpatine. What is his character role in there, and how does he function, and what I liked or disliked about him? And I think the perfect line to illustrate Palpatine and the entire issue with him is somehow Palpatine has returned. Without even J.J. Abrams' recent interview saying that, there's sometimes when you make a film, you don't have a plan. And I don't think he specifically talks about the sequel movies. If that's what fans want to extract, more power to them. I think he's talking about filmmaking in general. But it is evident from the Rise of the Skywalker that Palpatine comes out of nowhere. And that line specifically says that, we want you just to take it, our word for it. He survives. There's no foreshadowing in episode 7 or 8. There's no reason for him to be there. It almost feels like there was this void of a great villain to fill, and they put Palpatine in there. And I personally believe that Snoke never filled that role either. I don't think he was. He was an intriguing character in episode 8, and then Rian Johnson decides to kill him, which I actually liked. I'm like, okay, there's a little bit of intrigue there, and then you kill him off. He never looked to me like this. He was never equal to the Emperor that I saw in the original saga. He was not as intimidating, and he was not as capable. And so we see the resurrected Emperor as almost a carbon copy of the comic book The Dark Empire, which came out way before even prequels. And that's the first time we see the resurrected Emperor. He felt very two-dimensional, very cardboard. He felt like he's repeating the same shtick that the Emperor does in the original saga with Vader. He's basically Snoke's leash holder. He's like, ha, by the way, once again, I'm the puppet master. And he's, on top of that, he's some kind of a Force vampire. he gets this newfound abilities that comes out of nowhere. And we see that in the last confrontation with Rey. First of all, there are all these Sith figures in the background. We have no context where they come from, and that completely took me out of the picture. And I felt like, no, that's not the Emperor that I remember. And then he tries to suck Rey's power out of her because now all the Jedi live within her. And I just felt like it was J.J. Abrams' idea or concept to try to up the ante and show like, well, look, now it's the mega Jedi versus the mega Sith. And it's like to the power of 10,000, like in Dragon Ball Z or something, like super overpowered. I got that idea from it, but I just felt that it wasn't very well executed. And once again, if you're a sequel fan, which I am as well, I just think those sequels, and neither did the prequels, lived up to the legacy of the original Star Wars saga. But if you enjoyed that specific rendering of Palpatine, I would like to hear from you. I would love to hear your thoughts, and if you challenge me and give me your thoughts on this, that would be wonderful. And that basically entails all of the three distinct versions of Palpatine. And which one do I personally like the most? Well, I would say that I like two of them. I like the dark and ancient wizard magician that we saw in the original trilogy. And the way that Ian McDiarmid delivers his line, and the way that the script is written for him, and the way that he slowly chips away at Luke's armor word by word is immaculate. That has nothing been repeated to this extent on screen ever again. Because when we see same actor trying to perform same lines in the prequels, he sounds like a broken record. There are certain lines that he delivers that instantly sound familiar and recognizable from the original trilogy, and other lines we hear Ian McDiarmid modulate his voice to try to attempt to recapture that magic, and it never quite works. Again, perfect example when Anakin, stands on his knee and he says, I accept you. You are my master. Please teach me and help me save Padme's life. And Palpatine does something like, you must. He modulates his voice, but then he goes and he returns to that Emperor that you remember from the original saga. It's like, and there will be peace. And that very, very cunning and smug smile on his face. I'm like, it's sort of there, but not quite. And what I really enjoyed the Palpatine as a politician is what we see in the actual novels, particularly The Cloak of Deception. That, as I mentioned before, that's one of my favorite books. And I think to that capacity, the beautiful, beautiful story that the prequels tried to portray, but for me, they didn't quite execute well. We see a lot of those great ideas perfectly relayed in the novels. And that's where Palpatine benefits the most as far as the prequels are concerned. Anyway, these are my thoughts. And once again, I would like to reiterate that it's just one person's opinion. And I'm not trying to take away anything from you guys. I perfectly understand and sympathize with the younger generation who grew up with the prequels. And because children accept material at face value. And that is not to say that children's minds are more primitive and stuff like that. No, they're very, very sharp. They pick up information like this. But kids interpret information differently. They're not as cynical as us adults. They don't, have an issue with every minute detail, like, graphics there or old Palpatine's face over there. No, they look at the story and just embrace it. And something works for them or something doesn't on a much more intuitive level. And I wish I was younger going into the prequels and watched them, because it would have been a very different experience, just like in my previous podcasts where I talk with Josh from Star Wars on High, where he did grow up with the prequels, and that's exactly the way he interprets Palpatine and the rest of the characters. Anyway, guys, my name is Benjamin. I do Star Wars comic book and book reviews. I do character highlights. I do lore videos. I have this podcast that I invite different fans who don't always agree with me, but we have fun and interesting discussions. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting my channel, subscribe, like this video, hit the bell button, and I really appreciate your time and support. And I'll see you next time.